Um, Dear organizers, speakers, distinguished guests, first of all, thank you very much for creating such an opportunity uh, for me to be able to participate in such an important webinar on such a sensitive issue for us. And I would like to express my gratitude for that. I would like to express my gratitude to OIC Youth Indonesia and personal to Mr. Zaman Bajwa for inviting me. And yeah, that's Nagorno-Karabakh is quite sensitive issue for us. Therefore, we try to speak about it, and one of our duty is to make sure that others know about what's happening there in that region. And therefore, in order to understand the current situation, I guess as a lecturer, as a professor, we have to look a little bit back to the past, as Mr. Bajwa also told me that I better use facts there. So in order to clarify those facts, I guess it will be better if we go to the past and see what happened in the region before. So therefore, I have elaborated a small piece of presentation for you, so that you can, it will be clearer for you the history of this conflict. Now let me share my screen with you first of all. Yes, that's a small presentation. I'll touch on the main points. And can you all see my desktop here?
Yes.
That's great. Just 1 minute. So let me provide some brief historical background on this conflict. First of all, we can say that it all started with from the 19th century, and several treaties were signed there between Khanate of Karabakh and Russia in 1805, between Russia and then Iran and Russia and Iran. Two treaties were signed, Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan. Kyrgyzstan Treaty is important here. It has been mentioned on several occasions by our president as well, because that treaty was concluded between the Karabakh Khan Ibrahim Khan and the Russian General Sisyanov. And Ibrahim Khan was an Azerbaijani, which once more time, this treaty one more time indicates that Karabakh was Azerbaijani Khanate. It did not have anything to do with Armenians. Armenians actually never lived there before. Then, as a result of Turkmenistan Treaty, one of the points of articles of Turkmenistan Treaty stated that thousands of Armenians would it envisaged the resettlement of thousands of Armenians from Iran and eastern parts of Turkey to the Azerbaijani, to the western Azerbaijani territories, mainly Yerevan and Karabakh and Khanate, and also Zengezur. And as a result of these resettlements, those Armenians started to migrate and started to live in those territories. And ultimately, it was the actually deliberate policy of Russia to create some kind of religious balance in the region. And ultimately, in 1828, Armenian Oblast was created there. And then Armenians living there, they started to pursue the policy of ethnic cleansing, especially in the beginning of 20th century. They wanted to show to the world that these territories belong to them. So therefore, deliberately, they started to kill Azerbaijanis living in Zengezur, Karabakh, Yerevan, and Nakhchivan. And then in 1918, we had a republic, the first independent republic, ADR, established. And Karabakh was within ADR. But ultimately, we all know that Azerbaijan became a part of socialistic Russia. And nevertheless, on July 1921, with a decision of Communistic Party, it was decided that Nagorno-Karabakh had to be within the Azerbaijan, within Azerbaijan. So therefore, Karabakh remained obtained an autonomous status within the Azerbaijan SSR. And it all lasted until 1980s when some skirmishes and started to occur in the territory of Azerbaijan, particularly in Nagorno-Karabakh, when Armenians started to demand, let's say, independence and so on. And in 1988, February of 1988, Nagorno-Karabakh parliament voted for the unification with Armenia, and thus escalating the inter-ethnic conflict between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. And the thing was that the Moscow actually was ineffective in dealing with this problem, and some experts say that Moscow actually on purpose was not willing to do anything on that. They even ordered the dislocation of some more than 200,000 of Azerbaijanis from Armenia to Azerbaijani territories. And ultimately, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Armenians saw it as their opportunity to launch a war against Azerbaijanis in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And the result of this war, which started in 1991 and continued until 1994, when ceasefire was concluded, Armenian forces invaded almost 20% of Azerbaijani territories, and 24,000 Azerbaijanis got killed, and 1 million refugees and IDPs emerged. Then ceasefire was brokered with the mediation of representative of Russia, Kazimierov, in 1994. But nevertheless, although this ceasefire was signed, actually there was never a real ceasefire along the contact line. Armenians have been violating this ceasefire many times by launching different kind of attacks against Azerbaijani military personnel and civilians. The important part here is about the regulation of this conflict. Since 1992, the active phase of the regulation of this conflict started, and there were several main institutions there. First, United Nations, and then OIC, Minsk Group. United Nations, we all know that, issued 4 resolutions regarding this conflict, and I have to say that all these resolutions demanded recognized Azerbaijani territorial integrity and demanded immediate withdrawal of occupants from Azerbaijani territories. But the problem is that none of these resolutions have been implemented so far by Armenia. Then we have another important resolution which was issued in 2008, March 14th, Resolution 62243 of the UN General Assembly on the situation in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. And again, this resolution condemned Armenia for its aggressive policy and demanded immediate withdrawal. And of course, the involvement of OSCE must be mentioned as well. The Minsk Group was established to deal with this conflict, and there are 3 co-chairmen of Minsk Group, one from Russia, USA, and France. And indeed, in 1990s, Minsk Group came up with certain plans on the regulation of this conflict. Those plans were stage-by-stage plan, package plan, and common state plan. But nevertheless, Armenia did not demonstrate constructive stance towards these plans, and therefore those plans became ineffective as well. And ultimately, in 2007, the Madrid Principles and then updated version of Madrid Principles were introduced by the OIC, and according to these principles, these principles envisaged the stage-by-stage withdrawal of Armenian invaders, Armenian troops from Azerbaijani territories, and it envisaged the withdrawal in the first stage and withdrawal of Armenian aggressors from the 5 districts and then from 2 districts, and then ultimately it envisaged the restoration of the communication lines and the return of Azerbaijani IDPs to their motherlands. So actually, when we now speak about the base principles, those principles are based on these, let's say, Madrid principles, or we can call them framework principles. Now, speaking about the positions of parties to the conflict, and Azerbaijan definitely wants the restoration of the territorial integrity and unconditional withdrawal of Armenian occupants from all Azerbaijan territories, return of IDPs, and then the restoration of all communication lines. And then we can speak already about the status of Nagorno-Karabakh, but definitely it must be within the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. Territorial integrity always comes above all other principles, including self-determination principle, which has been the main claim of Armenia. And here the positions of Armenia on this matter, they were speaking about the so-called Nagorno-Karabakh Republic must participate there as a third party, right of self-determination, and so on. Now, speaking about what happened recently, first of all, one must say that in 2018, we knew that the new regime came to power in Armenia, and we saw that maybe new regime would be more constructive towards the resolution of this conflict. But nevertheless, after some time, it became obvious that the new regime actually was even more destructive regarding the resolution of this conflict. They started to issue some baseless statements such as Karabakh belongs to Armenia, and they must be a certain so-called Nagorno-Karabakh must participate in this regulation process as the third party, and they even dared to change their military doctrine, and the name of that doctrine became the New War for New Territory. So what does it mean? It means it's not in Armenia is not only satisfied with the occupied Azerbaijani territories. They had an intention to capture some more territories from Azerbaijan. So therefore, and in practice, this aggressive policy of Armenia and this destructive stance toward the regulation process showed itself on July 2020, when Armenia yet again launched another provocation against Azerbaijan, not along the contact line, but along the borders between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And ultimately, the clashes broke out there, and in the aftermath of these clashes, 12 Azerbaijani servicemen, including a well-known general and one civilian, were killed. The main goal of Armenia by launching this provocation against Azerbaijan was to, first of all, to threaten the main energy corridor of Azerbaijan. If you look at the map, you would see that this is the red square, and there actually Armenian provocation broke out. So that place is very close to the energy corridor, to the communication lines, which through which Azerbaijan actually transfers its oil, gas resources to other states. Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan, Baku, Tbilisi, Gars, and Baku, Tbilisi, Erzurum pipelines. Baku, Tbilisi, Gars is actually a railway. So all these communication lines pass through that territory, and therefore Armenia, by launching this provocation, wanted to kind of threaten our energy corridor. And also Armenia wanted to create another hotspot of conflict far away from their line of contact. And also, it's quite well possible that Armenia wanted to drag the third party to this conflict. As we know, Armenia is the member of CSTO, that's a collective security treaty organization. And I just want to stop sharing 1 minute. Can you hear my voice well?
Oh, we see the green screen also. I think your...
Okay, I want to stop sharing the desktop. Just give me 1 minute and I'll fix it. Okay, so yes, and that was the, so as we know, Armenia is the member of CSTO, and a third article of CSTO is very similar to the fifth article of NATO Charter, and therefore it's quite possible that Armenia wanted to drag, let's say, the third party, Russia, to this, to involve Russia to this matter, to this conflict as well. And yet another provocation by Armenia happened on August 23rd, when a sabotage group entered in Azerbaijan, and they had an intention to let's say commit terroristic acts against Azerbaijani civilians, but that group was captured by Azerbaijani military personnel. And ultimately, on September 27th, yet another provocation was committed by Armenian forces in Nagorno-Karabakh against Azerbaijani civilians and military persons, and ultimately Azerbaijan started to respond adequately, and Azerbaijan started to deoccupy or let's say occupied places from Armenian invaders, and we can call it peace enforcement measure as well. While Azerbaijan is actually conducting peace enforcement measures on its own territories. So why we can call it peace enforcement? Because the main goal of Azerbaijan to establish predictable, peaceful environment in the region, and as Armenia is the main threat to this environment, that's an ultimate goal for Azerbaijan to restore it. And it's not just Azerbaijani experts say it. If you look what, for example, Svante Kornell is a Swedish expert on South Caucasian, let's say, conflicts, and he also said that Armenia is the main threat to the security atmosphere in the region, and therefore Azerbaijan decided to respond assertively and to purify Azerbaijani soils from terroristic elements. Okay, and another reason for Azerbaijan to act in that matter was that the international norms and international law so far could not enforce Armenia to abide by adopted conventions and resolutions. Now, 4 resolutions were issued. Then again, there was resolutions issued by some other institutions. Armenia has been violating Geneva Protocol and so on. And the thing was that those institutions actually were ineffective in terms of exerting pressure on Armenia to abide by those resolutions and conventions. So therefore, it's actually an right and just stance of Azerbaijan, and we are on the right way, and we are actually enforcing Armenia to abide by those by the international accepted conventions and resolutions. If you have any questions regarding this, anything you would like to ask, I'm ready to respond. And we all know what happened today in Ganja, and that's yet the thing was that after liberating some of our territories, on October 10th, the humanitarian ceasefire was brokered between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And this humanitarian ceasefire, now why we call it humanitarian? Because the main aim of this ceasefire was to facilitate the exchange of dead military personnel and the exchange of prisoners. But nevertheless, Armenia yet again violated this humanitarian ceasefire by shelling ballistic missiles against Azerbaijani civilians, and one of these terroristic acts happened today in Ganja, as a result of which 9 civilians, 9 civilians got killed, and 34 civilians, including children, were wounded. So this is an act of terrorism because the target, because Armenia deliberately, the terroristic military political regime of Armenia deliberately targeted civilians. So therefore, we can only label it as an act of terrorism, and definitely we have to demand from international community to respond adequately through different mechanisms. Yeah, thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm ready to respond.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sultan Zahidov, for the insightful at the background of the Nagorno-Karabakh. And we know as that the Nagorno-Karabakh basically is the part of Azerbaijan, but this is more interesting because I see like such a country like Armenia that persists to want to get this such of a region, which is Nagorno-Karabakh. That means there's something in Nagorno-Karabakh that they want to make something, or they have something to take the Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think this is can make some good point for the question for the audience. So if you have some kind of a question for Mr. Sultan Zahidov, you can write now in the chat box, or you can speak. Right? You can open your mic. I can open it for you if you want. Thank you. Any question from the audience?
Good night. I have a question.
Yes. Good night.
Right. To Mr. Sultan Zahidov, let me introduce myself. My name is Hafiz Gifari Berlianto. I am a history student from the University of Indonesia. And what I want to ask to you is that which countries does support Azerbaijan and which countries does support Armenia in the terms of like giving military support until now? Thank you.
You're speaking about the military support.
Yes.
The thing was that our Azerbaijan definitely and also Armenia got military support from various range of states, and the main suppliers of weapons to Azerbaijan are Russia, Turkey, and Israel. That's a totally normal issue when you are in a state of war, as all other states do. That's your right to increase your military capacity. And you know, there was this famous realist Hans Morgenthau, who is the author of the book Politics Among Nations, and he was writing that the most important value for a state is a national interest, and you provide the states provide their national interest through mainly power, because power is the most effective mechanism. And you can either maintain your power or increase your power and demonstrate your power. But the thing is that sometimes when especially you are in a state of war and international law does not, let's say, international institutions and law don't function effectively, then definitely states start to increase their military capacity, and then when international institutions are further ineffective, then the state does have a right to demonstrate it. Okay, and therefore, I guess I firmly believe that that's a normal natural thing for a state which is in a state of war to purchase military weapons. And Armenia does the same thing. Armenia has been purchasing military weapons from various countries, and namely from Russia. But the difference was that Armenia acquires those weapons free of charge, and while Azerbaijan pays for those weapons. Okay, and that's the difference between Azerbaijan and Armenia on this matter.